thank you all for attending. My name is Tim Tomyer, and I'm Assistant City Manager for the City of Tucson and a former Director of Tucson Water. So I think I know something about the utility, but I'm learning that I am out of the loop more often than in the loop anymore. But I'm happy to be here with you tonight to talk about a process that we actually started a couple of years ago, and we're looking forward to bringing a refreshed and renewed water resources plan and outlook for Tucson for the community in the very near future. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge a couple of folks here in the audience with us here today. We do have Vice Mayor Lane Santa Cruz here today, and she'll be joining us on stage here in a moment. And then we have Ward 2 Council Member Paul Cunningham here with us. And there will be a video message from the mayor. She's actually in Phoenix doing the good works of Tucson up there, but her climate and sustainability advisor, Fatima Luna, is here tonight. So, hi, Fatima. With that, I'd like to advance the slide and give you a little bit of the fun housekeeping portion of the evening. So, first of all, again, thank you for attending. And we will start our evening with a 30-minute presentation, and then there will be plenty of time for a facilitated question and answer session with you all for the duration of the event until 6 p.m. There are speaker cards located around the back. Our ask is that you fill out a speaker card. It can be very brief with a topic or question that you have, and then we'll be collecting those cards so that when we do the facilitated panel, we can go pretty efficiently and get to as many questions as possible. Feel free to keep writing down your questions during the presentation or even during the Q&A. We'll be on the lookout for them and we'll bring them forward. I would also like to introduce our esteemed lineup for this evening. Oh, wait, before I do that, I've got to talk to this slide. So there's a QR code on the screen. It's also present on some of the handouts toward the back. There are a couple of live polls that we'll be doing through the app called Slido. So you are now approved to remove your electronic devices, activate them, not on sound, and navigate to the web address. You can either just hold your phone up on the camera to the QR code, or you can go to the website listed, enter the code, and then it'll bring up the first survey, and we'll have a couple of those questions to pose to you tonight. So you can either start answering that first question, or you can wait till we get a little bit deeper into the presentation. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide and introduce our panel for tonight. So again, I'm Tim Tomyer, Assistant City Manager. With us tonight is John Kamik, the Director of Tucson Water. He's a longtime water leader in Arizona, and his career spans many decades, most of it here in Arizona. He has had an emphasis on water resources management, utility leadership, and addressing water quality challenges for the Tucson community. He serves as an appointed member of the Governor's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Committee and sits on the board of directors of the National Water Reuse Association, and he is a director on the Arizona Water Association board. After John gives a presentation, we have Wendy Broley with us here from Brown and Caldwell. She is their Chief Technology Officer. Wendy has been in the industry for a number of years. And has worked in water, wastewater, planning, and engineering. And she has worked all over the country and, in fact, all over the globe. She's worked in industrial markets, municipal markets. She's designed treatment facilities. She's overseen large programs. And we're honored to have her as our guide through the One Water planning process that we're doing. And in fact, while she's now the Chief Technology Officer for Brown and Caldwell, she formerly was their One Water leader, working with communities around how to have a One Water conversation and plan for the future. And then finally, you'll hear from Jamie Galeta. She's a lead planner with the City of Tucson, also with the water utility. She works in the Public Information and Conservation Office. She joined the City of Tucson in 2016 as the Planning, Transportation, and Sustainability Policy Advisor for then Mayor Jonathan Rothschild. Prior to that, she was a research project manager at the Institute of the Environment at the University of Arizona. and with the Udelson Associates, a sustainability planning and consulting firm. She earned a PhD in ecological economics from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York in 2006, and she is a certified lead architectural professional in existing buildings. So that's your panel for tonight. We also welcome you to join us for the refreshments at the back of the room. Feel free to get up and move around as you find necessary. There are restrooms out across the lobby. In the case of an emergency, we would all gather in the parking lot just to the west of this part of the Tucson Convention Center. Again, please reference the Slido QR code and website. We will be interacting with you through that means. Next slide. So with that, I would like to welcome to the stage Vice Mayor Lane Santa Cruz, who will be introducing a message from our mayor.
All right, buenas tardes. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Lane Santa Cruz. I'm the Ward 1 council member that represents the south side, the west side, and part of downtown. And I'm currently have the honor of serving a term as vice mayor for the city of Tucson. And I want to thank you all for coming out today. I know that you could be having dinner with your family or catching up on your crossword puzzle or just spending time with family. But it's really important that we come together to answer and discuss the issues around Tucson One Water as we're figuring out our long-term plan to answer the question of how we're going to conserve and preserve water for the next 80 years and make sure that it's safe for our community as well. But first, I want to acknowledge that we reside on the ancestral lands of the Tohona O'odham for time immemorial, and also the Pascuayaqui tribe who have been here and inhabited this area for thousands of years. I know that in this region, especially our indigenous community members understand that water is sacred, and I know that all of you here today hold that as a value, and we want to know how we can be good stewards of this resource. So today is a critical moment. I know that hours ago, the Department of Interior declared a Tier 2 shortage on Lake Mead, which cuts across allocations of water from the Colorado River by 21%. And this declaration, as we know, comes as no surprise, as the city has been preparing for this for some time. But we need to make sure that we're not the only ones, carrying this weight and this responsibility, and that we act as a region. So if water continues to drop, then we know that this puts us all here at risk. So with the situation being extremely challenging, we know that it's not insurmountable and that we all have a role to play. So we're all here today to listen to each other, educate ourselves, share this information with our families, our neighborhoods, our community members, our places of work, so that we can come up with solutions of how we're going to confront these challenges. And for me, it's always important that we also hear from y'all of what are ways ways that you think we can reach more people. Because I think all of y'all that are here, it's important you're civically engaged, but we know that we all know people that aren't, represented here today, and if you have any feedback for us of how we can do better outreach, please feel free to let us know. So with that, again, I want to thank you all for being here today, and I want to introduce our mayor of the city of Tucson, Regina Romero, to share some remarks over video. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Tucson One Water 2100 Community Town Hall. Although I could not be with you in person, I am thrilled to know that so many members of this beautiful community care about our water resources and will help us prepare for a resilient future. First and foremost, I want to recognize the Tohona O'odham and Pascuayaqui peoples who have been stewards of these lands for thousands of years. As the original caretakers of this land and holders of traditional knowledge, we have much to learn from them as we prepare for a warming planet. As a desert city, we have had to adjust our water management practices. We went from being the largest city fully dependent on groundwater to a city with a more diverse water portfolio. Thanks to the outstanding leadership of Tim Tamir, John Kamik, and Silvia Amparano from Tucson Water, and the foresight of this and previous mayors and councils, Tucson is now recognized as one of the most water-resilient cities in the western United States. Thanks to these efforts, and most importantly, to the water conservation ethic of the entire Tucson community, we currently store about 30% of water we receive from the Colorado River for future use. Tucson is a leader in water efficiency, conservation, and water banking, and we have been planning and preparing for water security for decades. However, as the drought in the Colorado River Basin deepens, our conservation and water management strategies must adjust once again. We are ready to take the next steps to secure our water future amid continuing drought and shortage, but we need your help. This town hall is an opportunity to collectively identify solutions for a more resilient water future in Tucson. One Water is a new approach that treats all water sources, from stormwater, rainwater, gray water, recycled water, and surface water, as equally valuable. Tucson Water is adopting this approach for the One Water 2100 Master Plan. The Climate Action and Adaptation Plan team has been coordinating with the One Water 2100 team to ensure that the community's concerns around climate and water are being heard and incorporated. Both of these plans will inform the city's general plan update. Your partnership in this process is extremely valuable. Water is the most precious resource we have in the desert, and we all have roles to play informing the planning process and adopting, implementing, and promoting the innovative water management strategies that will come out of this plan. Thank you for being here, and I hope you have a constructive event.
Thank you all, and thank you to our mayor for preparing those messages for tonight. And before we move on to our next speaker, the mayor touched on a couple themes that I just want to make sure that everybody in this room is aware of. She mentioned the integral part of climate action and water sustainability in our upcoming general plan update. So we adopted Plan Tucson about a decade ago, and we'll be updating Plan Tucson here in the very near future. And I'm going to put on the spot Jasmine Chan, who is going to be our project manager. She's in the back, looking all happy for now. So any ideas about the future of Tucson? There she is. She's right there. I also want to point out that besides town halls like this and things that we do on the website and through emails, our mayor and council has study sessions on critical items on a regular basis. They meet every 2 weeks, and they're talking about things like what we're talking about tonight. So I want to highlight that on August 23rd, the upcoming study session, there will be an update on Tucson's development of a climate action and adaptation plan. On that same meeting, there will be an update on the Colorado River and our order for Colorado River Water Central Arizona project supplies for next year. So the business that gets done as a city is often done there at the mayor and council table, and I invite you to tune in if you haven't historically, and really that's a great opportunity to stay tuned and stay aware of all the things going on. And there's an additional item I should mention on the presence of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances in our local water supplies and what we do to manage them to make sure that the water that we deliver to Tucsonans is safe. So you would get updates on all three of those things on the 23rd. I did miss one housekeeping item earlier. We have a Spanish language real-time interpretation available if anybody would like to take advantage of that. They're seated right over there. They have headsets that they can provide in order to provide that real-time Spanish language interpretation. So with that, I would like to bring to the stage Director of Tucson Water, John Kamik.
Great, thank you, Tim. Welcome, everybody. I'm John Kamik. I'm the new director of Tucson Water, just started in June, and I am extremely happy to be here to see all of you. I recognize so many faces in this room, but I also see a lot of new people, and I know it's overwhelming for myself and our staff to have so many people interested in water resources and what we do with water in Tucson, that this is great. And thank you all for being here today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of tee up this presentation, the next few slides, in helping you understand what our water resource portfolio is and what we're looking at as far as our One Water plan. Everybody that lives in Tucson, and the mayor kind of pointed this out, we are very unique. We have an extremely diversified water resource portfolio. I'll explain that here in a second. And it makes us very unique, not only in southern Arizona, but across the western United States and across the world. We answer questions from all over the place on how does Tucson do it? How do you live in a community that gets less than 12 inches of rain per year and have such a diverse and large water resource portfolio? Well, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens with a lot of long-term planning, a lot of planning like we're doing now with this One Water 2100 program. Things that we've done as a community for the last 50, 60 years, knowing that we were dependent fully on groundwater and that groundwater system was depleting. The things we have done, and we'll get to it in a moment, shows us why we all as a community can be proud of where we're at and how resilient and unique we are moving forward. So, next slide. A little bit about Tucson Water. We serve nearly 750,000 people. We cover 390 square miles of service area, 30 billion gallons of water. We do this with a series of groundwater wells located not only in the Tucson Basin, but also out in Avra Valley. We have large reservoirs throughout the whole community that store water. Our reservoir system and how drinking water systems works are primarily a fire protection system. So all those reservoirs not only hold water in a drinking water format, but are there in case of an emergency, so it can suppress any type of large fire throughout the community with millions of gallons at a moment's notice. 4,600 miles of pipeline. You might see us digging a hole somewhere on a major road, fixing a leak, fixing something that's broken. Just remember our Cruz, and we are in Tucson Water in total is just over 550 employees. We're managing 4,600 miles of pipeline throughout the community, and then throughout also smaller systems located throughout the county as well. And then we have hundreds of booster stations and pressure zones because of the elevation change, whether the higher elevations on the southeast side all the way to the lower elevations along the Santa Cruz River. All that water has to move up and down to make sure that it meets the needs, so when anybody turns on a tap, that water is there at a constant pressure and ready for them to use as drinking water supply. We serve about 30% of our customers are outside the city limits. We serve about 50% of the town of Marana. So not only are we the city of Tucson's water supplier, we are also the water supplier in many areas throughout the community as well. Next slide. So one of the first questions with the Slido.com, hopefully you guys can, if you haven't done it yet, click on the QR code that's up in the corner, is where does the majority of your drinking water come from? And we have a variety of choices up there. If you want to put in your best educated guess on that, and I'll give it a few moments and let some people add it, but choices are groundwater, Colorado River water, stormwater, recycled water, all of the above, or none of the above. Has anybody doing this? Are we good, sir? All right. So the answers that we're seeing are Colorado River and all of the above, leading the way. Groundwater up there as well. 0% stormwater, 0% recycled. Here we go. Oh, numbers are still changing. Let's see. Excellent. Okay, well, let's freeze it right there. Let's give the correct answer, which is, it's actually a combination of all of the above. You might hear a lot of talk about the Colorado River is our predominant drinking water supply, and it is. But Tucson Water is actually known as a groundwater utility. We take Colorado River water, we return it to the groundwater system, and then that water ends up being part of our future drinking water supply. as well as groundwater itself. We still use some of that out there. But stormwater also helps our system from our aquifer levels throughout the community, as well as recycled water, which actually offsets a lot of the traditional potable uses that occurred 30, 40 years ago, but we also store that water in the aquifer for future use. So it's actually all of the above, and that's what makes Tucson very unique. Next slide. So some of our guiding principles for this One Water 2100 plan, we want to make sure that we still deliver water reliability through our system, that huge system of 4,600 miles, 60 plus reservoirs. We want to do innovative improvements to our infrastructure while doing that. We also want to reinforce our resiliency for planning for climate change, making sure we're using the right water for the right use, making sure that we have enough water for all uses that people wish to engage in. We want to enhance our community's quality of life by restoring riparian habitats. You may have heard about some of our projects bringing recycled water back to the Santa Cruz River in the last recent years, especially downtown, and trying to create those riparian habitats again. And we're looking at doing that at possibly other places. At the same time, though, we want to make sure that our Tucson water system is affordable for all of our residents. Everyone has accessibility to it, and it meets the social justice by committing the fiscal responsibility. We want to make sure that everyone can afford and be part of the system and be part of our process and our utility. And then lastly, but not least, ensure the public confidence with safe, high-quality water. Tucson is known for being very proactive in the United States in monitoring its water system discretionarily. So we not only do we treat our water to make sure that it meets the Safe Drinking Water Act standards, that's only about 95 compounds that the EPA monitors and makes water utilities pay attention to. We actually look for hundreds of compounds in addition to that, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's things like PFAS, things that are completely unregulated, but we want to be aware of those things. Tucson does that more than probably any other utility in the country by always looking ahead, looking over the horizon on what our next water quality challenges may be. And we're going to keep doing that because safe drinking water for our community is primary and paramount for us. Next slide. So an introduction to our water resources, and this is all based on our Tucson One Water approach, and so everybody kind of has the same fundamental knowledge of what we're looking at when we talk about One Water. We're talking about a series of water sources that we want to integrate into this long-range plan moving forward. So if you go to the TucsonOneWater.com, I think that's the right, yeah, did I get that right? Okay, TucsonOneWater.com. We have information about our water resources and what we use and how important it is to us. This slide, this chart, though, if I can stay on this chart that's to the right of the screen here, this is probably one of the most famous charts that those of us at Tucson Water like to share when we travel around the community and around the country. This tells so many stories. I could spend a half hour on this. I'm not going to do that because I know we want questions tonight. But many of us, Tim, Tomyer, and myself and others, this tells the story of Tucson Water and its water resources very well. So you see the dark blue starting from the left side of the screen and moving over to the right. The dark blue and that increasing dark blue was essentially from 1940 to about the 1980s, 1990s. That meant that Tucson was completely reliant on groundwater. That's what the dark blue represents. The dark blue, the groundwater, pumping native groundwater was our primary water resource for all those years. And it was during those years that it was quickly recognized that Tucson couldn't stay on this path. If Tucson continued to pump native groundwater, we would deplete our aquifers and we would end up being a true desert ghost city at one time. In those years is where the negotiations happened with the state of Arizona and with the federal government and others around us to make sure that the Central Arizona Project Canal could be built and extended all the way from Lake Havasu through the Phoenix metro area, all the way down with the terminus in the Tucson area. And so all those years of groundwater overpumping is really what focused Tucson into doing something different and creating a diverse water portfolio. So moving towards the middle of that graph, you see a little blip of light blue that comes into the picture. That was the first introduction of CAP water between 1992 and 1994. That's when we ran a surface water treatment plant directly. Unfortunately, we failed miserably at that. For those of you who might have been around during that time, and we had to put a pause to that. But also occurring around that time, you see the purple on the bottom. That is, Tucson was one of the first major municipalities in the state of Arizona to develop a community-wide recycled water program to get all those turf uses, schools, parks, other irrigation uses, golf courses, and get them onto recycled water, meaning taking the effluent coming out of the county treatment plants, treating it again to make it usable, and replacing drinking water from going onto those parks and schools and golf courses, and actually replacing it with renewable resources, being the effluent that was otherwise being discharged to the Santa Cruz River and not incorporated into our portfolio. So the reclaimed water system started around 1983. Also around the early 1990s as well, there's another colored line on there, kind of aqua colored, and that was the Tucson Airport Remediation Project. That was an issue that is still present. It was TCE contamination on the south side of Tucson that affected our community there. Part of the consent decree with the EPA and the other responsible parties is we would highly treat that water and return it for drinking water. So that then entered the drinking water portfolio from the Tucson Airport Remediation Project. But more importantly, the light blue comes back into play. After that little blip in the early 90s, the light blue pops in and you see it skyrocket and go all the way to fill most of that gap between the year 2000 and where we are today. That represents Colorado River water again. So it was in the late 1990s, early 2000s that the city truly embarked on creating facilities in Avra Valley in particular, and also partnerships in southern part of Tucson at Pima Mine Road, where we started to take our full allocation or close to it during those years of our Colorado River supply and banking it in the aquifer, turning it into groundwater for future use and current use. So the dark blue, the mining of native groundwater, goes away. The incorporation of renewable resources like Colorado River water, remediated groundwater, and recycled water all come into play to meet those demands across the community. The last very important thing about this graph, which people need to focus on, is the point of that graph. That point on that graph was about 15 years ago. You see the water use, which is represented on the y-axis, and then all of a sudden water use starts to go down. What we're using today is about the same amount of water that we were using in the late 1980s, but with more than 200,000 more people living in our community. That downward trend, that is conservation efforts. That is our community coming together, using less water, using our conservation programs, putting in those high efficiency appliances when they have the opportunity to do that. So that falling graph is an incredible story, and a story that people around the country and around the world look at when they look at Tucson. It's like, how can this community continue to grow, but their total water use continues to fall? It's a trend that we see in some other Western cities as well, but the Tucson story is unique with all these parameters in mind. So let's scroll a little forward, and you'll see, so our One Water, we can back up just a little bit, Sarah. So our One Water vision that we want to make sure that we incorporate in this long-range plan looks at all those waters, including stormwater. So we have surface water, what we can get from the Colorado when it's available. We still have our traditional groundwater accounts that are out there and our legal entitlement to groundwater. We have our recycled water that comes from the ownership of effluent that we get from the county wastewater facilities. And then we have stormwater. Stormwater is one of those new water resources that we've been focusing on just on the last few years and wanted to incorporate into our plan moving forward. Scroll a little bit, Sarah. So I was probably a little long-winded on it, but I love that graph, so I always like talking about that. So just a reminder, surface water, we have the surface water that does come from the Colorado. We do have the largest municipal and industrial contract, it's a priority 4 water with the Central Arizona project, and it comes through the CAP canal. It comes through Avra Valley. We bank most of that water in Avra Valley in our recharge facility for current and future use. We also bank it in the south at the Pima Mine Road recharge facility, which is co-owned by the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. We also do some other interesting things with that surface water. When we couldn't directly deliver the surface water, when we failed doing that in 1992 to 94, one of the projects that came out of that, because we knew we wanted to get this renewable resource that we were paying for and not using, was to enter partnerships with agriculture in the local community. And the partnerships and what the state allows during the Groundwater Management Act and how water accounting is done is they created what's called groundwater savings facilities. And what it allows a community to do is provide their water to an agricultural user in lieu of the agricultural user pumping groundwater. And then the community retains the rights to future groundwater in the equal amount for that. So what it does is create an awesome partnership that we've had now for probably getting close to 3 decades with several agricultural interests in Pima County, where they are actually using part of our water to do their agriculture, and in exchange every year we get groundwater credits related to that, as well as we make a little money on it. The farmers actually pay us to do that because it keeps them from using electricity or gas to pump their own wells and keep them. So it's a great partnership. So when we hear some of these stories about agriculture being cut with the drought declarations on the Colorado, they primarily affect farms located in Pinal County. They don't affect very much the farms in Pima County and our neighbors that do agriculture here for generations if they have an agreement with Tucson Water, Metro Water, Marana Water, Oro Valley, and some others, because they're able to use our priority water to continue their operation. So that's why Pima County is unique in that aspect and how we manage that and work in partnership with our agricultural partners. So the surface water comes here, 144,191 acre feet when we're allowed to order it all. We do that. We've been doing that for several years now. There are going to be cuts. You may have heard it today. It was mentioned that the Tier 2A declaration based on the 2019 drought contingency plan for the lower basin was announced today by the Bureau of Reclamation. That means that we will probably have a portion, a small portion at least, at this point in time, of our full allotment being cut. We anticipate it could be anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 acre feet for the calendar year of 23. However, the Secretary of Interior is still looking for 2 to 4 million acre feet from the Colorado basin to be trimmed back by the 7 basin states in some kind of agreement to prop up Lake Mead and Lake Powell overall. So today was just chapter 1 of the story of what we're dealing with. We are going to be in a Tier 2A as of January 1st for calendar year 23, which means that we will have a small part of our allocation not accessible this year. So let's move on from surface water. Groundwater. I mentioned groundwater. The dark blue on that map is our historical water supply. But what we've been doing since we replaced renewable resources, replaced groundwater with more use of renewable resources in the community, we have now can generate awesome maps like this, which are water level change over the last 20 years. So the darker colors, your greens, your blues, your purples, even your your greens in the middle of town, along where the Santa Cruz River is, up in northern Navajo Valley, that shows that the water table elevation has actually been coming back and rebounding from a combination of natural recharge, but also rebounding from less pumping that we're doing, and also from where we're storing Colorado River water. So we're banking all that water. The real dark purple spot, that's where our recharge facilities are in Navajo Valley. A lot of water being banked out there. We only use about 2/3 of our Colorado River allotment on an annual basis. About 1/3 ends up banked in the aquifer. We got about 5.5 years of Tucson's current water demand is actually banked in Navajo Valley for the most part. And if we ever had to use it, it's there, and we will use it in the future. But those colors all coming back just quickly within 20 years, the rebounding of the aquifer. And that is a great story. You don't want to deplete your aquifer. Deplete it too much, you end up with something called subsidence, where your elevation ends up collapsing, much like a sandcastle. Once you dewater it, the sand ends up falling down. So that was always a threat to this area, and one of the reasons why bringing in Colorado River water to augment our water supplies was so critical. And we're showing that the way we manage water, we're actually bringing the aquifers back. A little note, not a lot of people know this, and I mentioned that 50, 60 years of water planning that the city of Tucson has been doing. That area where we recharge water out in Avra Valley, that is one area that the city of Tucson owns. The mayor and council of city of Tucson in the early 1970s knew that having property and retiring agriculture, which is a large user of water, that depleted our aquifers, needed to stop to be able to eventually get the CAP canal down there and get a renewable water supply. The city of Tucson actually owns 22,000 acres of retired farmland from the late 60s and the early 70s that not a lot of people know about, but they retired them, they stopped pumping water. We actually retain and have those groundwater rights for if we ever need to use them in the future. So that's when 50 years of water resource management in this community is what's setting us up and is what's making us so unique. Next slide. Recycled water, I dabbled with this a little bit. So after the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, the city of Tucson went full bore into developing a recycled water plant or the reclaimed water system. So we reach all those facilities throughout the community. Most of the golf course, 17 golf courses, a lot of school districts, TUSD and Sunnyside, as well as county and city parks are on the reclaimed water system. It's another way we use that one drop of water multiple times over again. And I know I got to wrap this up. See, I get long-winded. I get excited when I talk about water resources. The newer thing that we're talking about is stormwater, bringing in stormwater to help create those habitats throughout the community. It's the reason why a few years ago, our mayor and council created the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Program. A lot of those projects are being rolled out right now in our neighborhoods to help capture stormwater in a neighborhood scale to actually create green spaces and create cooling spaces and create the need not to use drinking water to irrigate things, to actually put desert adaptable plants in those medians, in those places in the neighborhood, and to beautify our community even more. So stormwater is a thing we're looking at more and more into the future, and we're going to be hopefully expanding that throughout the community. Next slide. All right. So my last question for the group in the Slido change is, what do you see as Tucson's most significant water challenge moving forward? We have a series of things listed up here. I'll read them really quick and then give you guys a few moments to add in your comments. So what's our challenges? Is it water supply changes? Is it water demand changes? Is it system resiliency, community education? Is it equity and affordability, government policy regulations, water energy nexus? You'll hear that if you're into the water movement quite often, and economic variability.
I don't see Copper World up there.
What's that?
I don't see Copper World up there.
All right, well, it looks like water supply changes is coming out ahead. I think all of these we're going to see in our plan have some relationship that we want to pay attention to, but water supply changes is definitely one of those as far as our long-range planning is concerned, and that'll come out even more. But there is a tie to all these things that we want to pay attention to as a utility moving forward to ensure that we have long-term sustainability for the Tucson community indefinitely, not just to the year 2100. So sorry I went a little long, but now I think we can go to the, sorry. So this is the last integrated water resource management plan that we're doing while you're here, while you're learning about the city of Tucson and Tucson water and what we want to do in the future. One water. How do we use our recycled water, groundwater, surface water, storm water to our highest, fullest, and best potential? And now I'll introduce Wendy Broly. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to speak among this esteemed panel. I'm going to be talking a little bit with you about the scenario planning process that we ran as part of the One Water planning process that we did with Tucson Water. And it's actually quite an honor to be here in person with you, because the last time I was in Tucson was when we kicked off this process, and it was right at the brink of the pandemic. And so we ended up having to go virtual, so it's really nice to be here with all of you and see your faces this time. So I thought what we might do is start by talking a little bit about what scenario planning is, if you want to go to the next slide, in case some of you may not be familiar. So scenario planning is a tool that organizations have been using really for decades to plan for a more uncertain future. And it feels quite appropriate these days to be thinking about the uncertainty that our future holds. And that's why it tends to be an important part of an adaptive planning process like One Water. And so what it offers us is insights into plausible combinations of risk factors that may emerge as future realities. Now, when I talk about scenario planning, theoretically, it kind of goes, it's a little bit hard to grasp, and so I like to do this with a little bit of an example. Imagine you're planning a wedding, and you've picked a date that historically, for the last 10 plus years, has been just perfect weather. The weather is in the 70s to 80s, it's been dry, and so you would imagine your probable future is it's gonna be a great day. And if you were going to plan based on that history, you would probably make sure that you got to enjoy an outdoor venue, no problem. But what if it rained? How impactful would it be for your wedding day? And so when we think about applying a scenario planning process, what we're actually doing is considering what is a plausible future that is uncertain, weather being quite unpredictable, but would have a really significant impact if it did happen. And when we can think about that range of plausible factors, plausible futures, it gives us the opportunity to actually mitigate those risks. So maybe instead of planning for a completely outdoor venue, we have a backup plan with some tents, or we have a little bit of an indoor-outdoor setting. So you can start to imagine we can have our wonderful day even if something were to occur that we might not have otherwise predicted. So that's why we look at scenario planning when we go through this process. If you look at that cone, you see the probable future we might be able to predict from our past experience or from the data. It might tell us one thing, and we can certainly plan for that. But what we wanted to do through this process is engage with Tucson Water staff and with your community to understand the range of concerns and broaden our perspective so that we can mitigate those risks when you think about 80 years from now, how uncertain that future might look. And the scenario planning process offers a structure for us to go through the process. We begin by looking at a range of different factors that are of particular concern to the community that might affect water in Tucson in the future. And then we think about how uncertain those potential factors are and how impactful it would be if they occurred with respect to the future of water in Tucson. And when we can pull all those things together, we start to see the futures that really emerge, and we can create strategies that help us mitigate those risks and create a more resilient water future in Tucson. And so if you go to the next slide, we actually pulled a diverse group of stakeholders together that represented your community. And this was right before the pandemic began, so we did a lot of this virtually. What we asked the stakeholders to do initially is come up with those factors that were of potential concern or risks that would threaten Tucson water in the future. And so what you see here is a number of those factors kind of combined into categories, 8 driving factors. Water supply changes, water demand changes. If you notice, these might seem familiar because you just weighed in on them. And so I'm not going to read through all of them. Some of these may feel very intuitive to you, like, of course, water supply changes are going to have a huge impact, and they may be uncertain in our future. Others may be a little less intuitive, so I thought I might at least describe something like, for instance, water energy nexus. Raise your hand if that is intuitive to you or if you know what we mean by that. Okay, so for those of you who aren't as familiar, water and energy are very intertwined in so many ways. It takes a lot of energy to move water around, but also water can be used to produce energy. So take, for example, Lake Mead. As the water level goes down, it gets to the point where that hydroelectric station cannot actually produce energy. And so that potential risk, when you think about that is one of the largest hydropower stations in the country. There's a real risk around the ability to produce energy when water levels get so low. So we have to kind of consider that bigger picture when we think about the considerations around OneWater. One thing that all of these have in common is that they each have a level of uncertainty that can each have a specific impact on the future of water in Tucson. If you go to the next slide, what we asked stakeholders then to do is to rank all of those driving factors by their level of uncertainty and the impact that that would have. And the two that floated to the top were supply, or the level of diversification of your supply portfolio here in Tucson, which you saw was quite significant, and demand, the changes in demand. And that's the amount of water that your community uses or needs at any given point in time. And so when we plot them together, what you can start to see is these future scenarios emerge, hence why we call it scenario planning. So we asked the participants to really sort of live in these futures. And what does it feel like to experience a future where we have a very low level of diversification of our water supply? Maybe we have only a few supplies. Maybe they're interruptible supplies. And our demand is increasing. They defined that as a thirsty desert. And you can imagine what that evokes, being in that future. Then on the other end of the spectrum is a sustainable oasis where we have a diverse supply portfolio and demands are decreasing. And you can experience that. It evokes a certain level of security and supply reliability. And so the whole point of the scenario planning process then is to develop strategies that mitigate the risks of living in a thirsty desert, so that you can foster the kind of environment that enables you to be a sustainable oasis in Tucson for 80 plus years. And so that's an exciting part of the planning process, and it all informs the broader OneWater 2100 master plan. So what I'd like to do is actually go to the next slide. We're going to do a little bit of a poll. I'd love to hear from all of you. How would you create a sustainable water future for Tucson? What kind of strategies would you want to put in place? And this is going to be a word cloud, so you can put in there, I think there might be a character limit, but let's hear from you and we'll start to see what you all believe a sustainable future looks like here in Tucson. Conservation, definitely. And the more people use a certain phrase, the more we're going to see it get bigger in this word cloud. Rainwater harvesting, in the questions that you all answered registering, I saw a lot of questions related to rainwater harvesting. Great. And gosh, I didn't bring my glasses, but let's see. A lot on water harvesting, a lot on conservation. And somebody else is going to have to tell me what the rest of them say, because they're small. Technology, I see. Oh my God, buy farmland. Okay, well, there's a lot of great ideas, and I know that the group is going to be collecting all of this information. I actually wanted to mention, so if you go to the next slide, The rest of the process with the stakeholders actually did start to consider some of these mitigation strategies. And they were tasked with, coming up with how could we mitigate some of the risks associated with those scenarios and really foster that kind of a sustainable oasis environment. And these were the primary strategies that were developed. Increase use of recycled water. And so you started to already hear the level of diversification of your water supply here in Tucson. Let's continue to develop that. Let's develop it further. Continuing to treat groundwater and making sure that water quality and quantity is available long term. Expanding rainwater and stormwater harvesting to enable your communities to really conserve the potable water supply for other purposes. And developing on-site water reuse, which is a really great strategy to enable economic growth, but doing that in a really water sustainable way. So some initial strategies to build upon, but the next phase of this process is a community engagement campaign that Jamie's going to be talking about, and she's going to mention a little bit about this next phase of the process in terms of getting your feedback on the different mitigation strategies that are being developed. Jamie?
Thanks, Wendy. So we're almost there to the Q&A, the reason you all came. It's great to see you all here. I just have a couple slides where I wanted to emphasize the other opportunities we have during this campaign for you to let us know what you want to see in the plan that we ultimately take to Mayor and Council. So Wendy just covered some of those strategies that we're starting to look at, but now I want to discuss just our big picture goals for this campaign. We want to make sure we're getting broad feedback that's truly reflective of the community. A big part of that is having events like this where we're inviting all of you, and we appreciate you coming. Basically just increase awareness of our One Water approach. Not everyone in Tucson knows where our water comes from. We want to encourage that baseline understanding. We want to build on the scenario planning outcomes that Wendy just reviewed with you. Identify strategies and actions that address the key drivers of risk, which we saw on the previous slide. We're starting to build that list out. A lot of the feedback we're getting tonight will help us build that list out. So that list is our strategies and actions that we want to take and incorporate in the plan. We're going to prioritize those strategies and actions with a survey that we're going to launch in the fall. And we hope that you sign up on our website for our mailing list so we can email that survey directly to you. We'll see you out at community events where you'll have an opportunity to do that survey as well. Ultimately, those prioritized strategies and actions are what we're going to base the plan on. And next slide, I'll show you when we take that to Mayor and Council. So here's our timeline. The past couple of years, we've been setting the foundation, working with folks like Wendy and with Katz and Associates and Gordley. They made all these amazing posters that you saw in the lobby. We've also been working with Carollo, lots of great partners. Wrote a series of tech memos that kind of establish our existing conditions. And then we started working on establishing the direction, doing the scenario planning. And now where we're at, and this is the big kickoff for it, is this bigger community engagement campaign where we start to get feedback on those mitigation strategies and actions. Again, we're going to prioritize those through a survey that you'll see in the fall. We'll be out at public events with that survey as well. But if you sign up on the website, you will get it directly in your email inbox. We'll also be sending you updates on how the plan is progressing. As Tim noted earlier, we are coordinating with Mayor Romero's Climate Adaptation and Action Plan. So some strategies are addressed in One Water, while other climate strategies are addressed in the climate plan. All of that is going to come together and inform the next general plan update, as Tim mentioned. So that's our process. This is where we're at right now with the community engagement campaign, and thank you so much for giving us your feedback tonight. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Wendy. She's going to facilitate our Q&A, and yeah, take it away, Wendy.
Okay, all right. So we are going to open it up for Q&A. At this point, we are actively kind of pulling together some of the cards that you all have written. If you have not already written down your questions on the cards, folks are picking them up right now. I invite you to take a moment to pull those together. And we do want to be as inclusive as possible, so we are collecting these cards and we are going to be answering these questions, as many of these questions as we can get to. And so we are going to begin. I think I'm going to begin while we collect some of these with one question. Jamie, I'm going to ask you this question as you are heading up this One Water planning process. So in the One Water, eating my hair. In the One Water 2100 plan, how will Tucson Water ensure sustainable quality water in light of Tucson's rapid growth and dwindling resources, such as Lake Havasu's historic low water levels that feed our CAP distribution?
I'm going to start this off, and then I'm going to hand it to Tim or John. But the first part that I've managed is this master plan effort, or long-range plan effort. We have done a number of technical memos that have looked at our long-range supply and demand out to the year 2100. And so we have a technical memo on water use projections, and it shows the probable cone, the part of the cone that Wendy referred to, where we're basing it on the data and we're looking out in the future, and we can see that the supply we're projecting will meet the increase in population despite climate impacts, and given what we project from our conservation program to be able to save. So that is in our technical memo, and from there, I'm going to hand it over to Tim.
So I can, thanks, Jamie. I'll jump in a little bit. And it's interesting because we are hosting this on a day when the Bureau of Reclamation announced the conditions of the Colorado River for next year. And it's actually going to the next lowest level, next deeper shortage than the year we're in now. What's important to realize is that while the river is having significant challenges and is in a crisis, that does not translate into Tucson's in a crisis. And there's a lot of reasons for that. John took you through the water demand and supply graph that shows that through your conservation efforts, we use less water than we did in the past. That's allowed us to actually bank extra water for the future, of which we have many years worth of water sitting in Tucson, regardless of the conditions on the river. We also have, even though Arizona has a relatively low priority in the Colorado River, within Arizona's allocation, Tucson has a relatively high priority. And then we also have been making the investments in recycled water and rainwater harvesting and stormwater capture, that all of that collectively puts us in a very good position to be able to withstand the drought, the aridification that's occurring in the basin, and make sure that Tucson is sustainable.
Excellent. By the way, that was one of the questions that came directly from those of you who did put questions into your registration form. So thank you for those as well. We definitely heard them, and we'll incorporate some of those as we go through as well. Okay, next question. There's a number of questions that came through actually about CAP, and you answered already a couple of them. So I'm going to go to this question, which is a little bit of what you were already touching on, but I'd like you to go a little further with it. So this question is, what are the likely outcomes of the Colorado River shortage on Tucson and surrounding reservations?
Okay, so some of the outcomes that we anticipate in the next couple of years is that contracts will end up changing. It was always planned in the year 2026, what was called reconsultation was going to occur on the river, which would adjust contracts that municipalities like Tucson and others have with the Colorado River in the state of Arizona. So that is still going to occur. So our current contract is 144,191 acre feet per year. But going through reconsultation with the drought that's currently occurring, we anticipate that we will end up with some type of reduction in that. What that scope is, what it's going to be in the future, we don't know, but that's something that Tim and myself are engaged in at the state level. and then at the state level engaged in at the basin level. So the one thing I could say is we're going to continue to fight for Tucson. You know, that's part of our job to make sure to keep our Colorado River contract as high as it potentially can be.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I could add to that, everything John said is correct. I just want to add 2 points. There are 2 populations in that question that are often underrepresented in these conversations. One is Southern Arizona itself, and the other is our tribal partners. So I want to reiterate what John said and put a little finer point on it. Historically, Tucson, Southern Arizona has not been well represented in the state or the region in these conversations. We've not been at the table. But over the last 6 years, we've been at the table, and actually both John and I serve on the Arizona Reconsultation Committee for the state of Arizona and the Governor's Water Augmentation Committee. So whether tonight gives you any confidence that we're doing a good job with that, I'll leave that to you. But I just wanted you to know that we're actually at the table, we're in the conversation. And our tribal partners, and you also recently saw an article from Governor Lewis from the Gila River Indian community about that voice once again not being heard in the recent announcements. And I'll say that that is still an ongoing struggle. We are advocates for our tribal partners here in Tucson, and we actually have contractual relationships and political relationships with both the Pasquayaki and the Tono O'odham as they're exerting their rights. We're actually a partner with the Pasquayaki in their attempts to seek a water rights settlement, which they do not yet have. We are also partners where we are integral to providing resilience and backup supplies for Colorado River water entitlements held by the local tribal communities in the form of the reclaimed water and recycled water. The first 28,200 acre feet of that generated here locally in Tucson is actually allocated to shore up water rights for our local tribal communities. So by no means are we perfect, and we are not at a point where their voices and our voices are heard robustly, consistently, and adequately, but we're doing a lot, coming a long way, and working together to support one another in those discussions.
And I know that equity is a huge part of the intent behind the One Water planning process, which is fantastic. Another important facet of the One Water planning process was water quality, and there's a question here related to PFAS. And I wanted to just ask if you could address the PFAS issue. In this case, the question was, as most of our tap water is from the Central Arizona project, can you discuss whether PFAS is a concern in that water supply or more broadly?
Okay, I'll answer that one. PFAS is a significant challenge for us in the Tucson Basin, and there's 2 areas where PFAS is occurring in significant concentrations, and that's northwest of Davis-Monthan in the groundwater system and northwest of Tucson International outside of the Arizona Air National Guard base. When I was giving my presentation, I talked about how water quality and understanding water quality, even things like PFAS, which are completely unregulated for the most part, has been a priority for Tucson Water for years now. We first discovered PFAS in testing some of our wells back in 2009. We've been the ones who've been telling the EPA, telling ADEQ, telling anybody who would listen to us for the last 13, 14 years, something's happening in Tucson. We've been avoiding those parts of the aquifer and not serving this water, but at the same time, we've been challenging all the regulatory officials and telling them that we've been doing all this discretionary testing and we're finding this weird compound in certain parts of our aquifer. PFAS, thankfully, is not an issue in the Colorado River supply. So what we do and store our Colorado River and recover that in Avra Valley and deliver it to the community is PFAS-free. All of our wells that we currently operate in Tucson are essentially PFAS-free. We've shut down over 25 over the last 5 years. Whenever we have a detect of a PFAS compound, it basically goes into an off status. But we are still challenging those officials and those responsible parties that we're using, and this is coming from firefighting foams that are generally used at military establishments and airports that release those compounds into our environment. And unfortunately, right now, we have to avoid those parts of the aquifer, so we do not serve that water.
All right, thank you. Another thing that I'm hearing a lot of questions on, getting a lot of questions here, and there were a number of questions in the registration forms as well, around conservation. So John, this one is going to be back to you as well. How secure is Tucson's current supply in light of the current drought conditions, and how will Tucson's water conservation program address the issue?
It's a great question. I know we kind of touched on it in several of our presentations. Like I mentioned before, our current Colorado River allocation is about, we only use about 2/3 of it. We've been banking for years excess water, so we are set up with excess water stored in our groundwater system. We have groundwater rights related to that 22,000 acre-feet of farmland that we retired going on now more than 50 years ago. We also have that effluent that we're using and recycling within the community. So having that diverse portfolio hopefully has come through in the messaging tonight, but also the conservation ethic that Tucson as a community has that has been demonstrating to the rest of the country that you can still have a high quality and standard of life with less water. You don't need to have a 5-gallon per flush toilet. You can get by with 1.1 or whatever is out there right now at Home Depot. You don't need to let the sink run when you're brushing your teeth. You can use water wisely. So that messaging and that program for conservation is still going to be coming throughout our community. Actually, I'll let Jamie, if you want to add to any of that conservation stuff.
Yeah, just that's one of the pillars of our water security in Tucson is our community conservation ethic. That's what has allowed us to save water, as you saw with that historic production demand chart. And we're just looking for your feedback during this process on how to prioritize our conservation program, the rebates, those types of things that you think are the most important to include in the plan to make sure we're able to build towards that sustainable oasis and keep this going.
Wendy, can I add just one point to that?
Yeah, go for it. Actually, Jamie, keep it.
So I'm just going to give a quick summary of that, reflecting back to the chart that John showed. That's his favorite chart, with that peak in water demand around 2004 dropping. Today, we're able to tell you that the cuts to our allocation from Colorado River water for next year won't impact us. That would not have been true if we still used water at the rate we did in the mid-1980s per person or in the mid-2000s as a community, because our total water use was almost exactly equal to that total allocation of water. So we would not have been banking water, we would not have been storing water for the future, and we would have been facing a cut next year if it weren't for the conservation done by Tucsonans. So we need to really emphasize that the supply and the demand sides work together, and it's only because of the conservation that we're not facing a cut that we feel next year.
I love that, and I think that it's obviously reflected by people's attendance here today, the role that they clearly want to play in Tucson's water future. So I think this is a good question. How can we get our neighborhoods actively engaged in this effort to conserve, harvest, and reuse water?
That is a great question, and we would definitely appreciate your help. We won't succeed at this if we don't have it. So a lot of you at my table tonight asked questions along the lines of, how can we plant more trees? We have the Mayor's Million Tree Challenge and our Storm to Shade program. Those are both great ways to get more trees into your community. If you're the member of an HOA, that's a wonderful platform. Definitely sign up on our website to get involved in our updates. Encourage your friends and neighbors to do the same, and we'll email them directly the progress on this plan and other opportunities they have. You'll find out about all the community events that we're going to that you can come and ask us more questions at. We're going to fill out a large frequently asked question list on our website and keep that updated if people have these sorts of questions to refer to. Yeah, all that good stuff. There's a comment form on the website too, another good way to let us know what you'd like to see or what you need from us in order to effectively get this message out across the community.
Excellent. All right, Tim, this question is going to go to you. Curious how the city is evaluating ongoing processes and policies to reflect the new water goals that are coming out of this planning process.
So we are always challenging the way we do business as a city, and that's across all of our operations. Specific to this water resource, water supply space, on June 7th, Mayor and Council directed Tucson Water to look at 5 different potential new water policies related to how we provide water service in the community and the nature of that water service. I'll sum it up by featuring one of those 5 policies that they've asked the utility to look at. which is a concept called net zero water. So the concept of net zero water can take many forms, but the basic idea is to, when you permit a new development, whether it's a house, a commercial, or an industry, that new development does not have a negative impact on our water supply. And that can happen in a number of ways. First of all, how you design a building can reduce its water demand. The fixtures and the types of appliances you put in that building, the way you heat and cool that building, the way you put tree canopy in order to shade that building, the way you grade the landscape for water harvesting around that building. All of those things can reduce the new demand for water that new building creates. And then ultimately, there could be buildings that get to almost net zero water, but not quite. And what do you do in that circumstance? And in that circumstance, quite honestly, what we'd be looking at is assessing a fee. That fee would be paid in order to be invested in some other building in Tucson that has high water use, has inefficient appliances. Perhaps for members of our low-income community that might have a leak or a leaky toilet that they can't afford to repair on their own, but if we had a funding source, so that new development is a break-even on water supply, both how it's designed and how it generates money to address other water-saving, low-hanging fruit already existing in Tucson. So that's one example that the utility is working on. Excellent.
All right. This is an important question. I think I see a number of young folks sitting in the audience today. So this is a question for any of you. How do you plan to effectively reach the younger generations with this information, as they will be the ones involved and affected in 80 years?
I'm going to take a lead on this because I know who we reach out to the most, and it's a very carefully constructed list of community stakeholders, but also it's people that we hear from often and we know and have relationships with, but more importantly, it's people that we don't hear from. And the younger folks are one of those groups, and they have certain representatives in the community. There's certain community groups we know we can work with. We reach out to those. The city has a number of boards and commissions, and one of those is a education commission, the Metropolitan Education Commission. There's a number of good resources, ways that we can try and work with those networks through trusted agents that just have more of a relationship with the folks that we're trying to reach. So, we're not just trying to come out of nowhere with this planning effort. It seems kind of dry, trying to work with people already in those networks that we don't hear from as much, and get them invited to these types of events, get their feedback through the website and through the survey that you'll see coming out in the fall.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. One thing that Tucson Water has been doing for many years, probably close to 20 years now, is investing in what's called Arizona Project WET, and that's water education for teachers. So a lot of our young people, and now they're in their 20s or 30s now, have been going through these elementary and high school programs, learning about the Tucson water cycle already. They understand the urban water cycle and how we utilize that in our community. So Tucson Water is going to continue to invest in that elementary level and that secondary education programs, so that all of our children growing up understand the value of water and the importance of it in their lives living in the Tucson community.
All right. Well, we are pretty much at time, but I'm going to ask one more question and then one very quick question that I think is logistical, if we can plan for it. All right, because there's so many questions, and I'm sorry we're not able to get to all of them. I wanted to, before we wrap up, just let you know that if we didn't answer your question, Tucson Water is going to be creating an FAQ of frequently asked questions, information that can be provided at TucsonOneWater.com, at the same website that you've been seeing. So if you don't get your questions answered, make sure that you go check that out. But this is another good question. There's a lot of interest around stormwater harvesting, rainwater harvesting. Are there any plans to switch from rainwater harvesting and water conservation rebates to grants or scholarships, with the note that rebates privilege people who can afford costs up front and present a major barrier to residential uptake? It's a good one.
So we already have started down that road. We have scholarship grant programs for rainwater harvesting for applicants that meet the qualifications. So we will pay for part of their rainwater harvesting installation upfront, so they don't have to carry those upfront costs. Storm to Shade is also our latest addition to do stormwater harvesting on a neighborhood scale. And that program is going out again into our, all over Tucson, but especially in neighborhoods that are underrepresented in terms of where these sites tend to be. So we're intentionally reaching out to parts of our community that have low shade canopy.
And what I'll add to that is we're doing much of that work through our trusted partners in the community because we're not always effective as the government in reaching many parts of our community that, for whatever reason, are facing those barriers to adoption. So we have a partnership with Sonora Environmental Research Institute, or SERI, where they have a Promotora program where they go out, they're trusted members of many parts of our community, and they can engage people into these grant and loan programs specifically for rainwater harvesting. And Mayor and Council, even though this is a water event, Mayor and Council has also asked us to look at a solar empowerment program where we would do similar approaches to getting folks and reducing barriers to adoption of residential solar in Tucson as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, this has been wonderful. It's been great to get a sense of the incredible interest from this community in Tucson's water future. Last question is, where can they go to get more information, including the presentations tonight?
The presentation is being recorded. Apologies, it was my responsibility to say that up front, and I did not, but we did record it. It will be posted on this website. The story map that John was reviewing with you, that's on the website. Opportunities to get involved, all that good stuff. Just fill out the comment form if anything's missing, and we'll get it addressed.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
I have one last thing.
Need to turn it on.
Here.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. All right. One last thing before we go for the evening. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Sweetwater Wetlands. That was Tucson Water's first attempt at creating a constructed riparian habitat that is now known worldwide, and it's an Audubon place of importance throughout North America. If you've never been to the Sweetwater Wetlands, please find time when the weather's a little cooler. It's a little hot to go out there right now. But in the fall, go out there, enjoy it. It's a beautiful place, and hopefully we can develop more things like that in the future for this community. Thank you.